Hi guys, today I thought I would share with you how I prune the bushy tomato plant. Some say don't prune, some say you can prune, but this is how I prune my tomato plant, because really you don't need all the foliage that is on there. But because it is not an indeterminate plant, it will send a lot of suckers. Now that is where you're going to get most of your or all of your fruits from. So rather than pruning the suckers, like, let's see, here in the armpit of the plant, you see that tiny sucker coming right there. That is where you're going to get your tomato from, so you don't want to prune that. So what I do with all my tomato plants that are bushy tomato is anything that falls below the point where the plant is blooming, like the first bloom from the plant up, anything below that, then I tend to prune those. And rather than taking the sucker, for example, right here, as you can see, here's the armpit of the tomato plant, and here you have a sucker coming up with blossom on it. So rather than taking the sucker out, which would be this one, rather than taking the sucker out, I would take the leaf off instead. So here we go. I would just gently break that off, because this part of the plant really is not going to produce any fruit whatsoever. So you don't need all that leaf on it. So rather than taking the sucker out, you take off the leaf below it. And also, here I have one of the leaves that is actually resting on the ground. So those ones I also break off. And allow it to grow. Use a lot of the energy to focus on the tomato rather than focusing on growing all that foliage that we do not need. So let's see here. I am not a big fan of the bushy tomato, though, I must admit. I rather plant the indeterminate ones. But then the growing season here in Saskatchewan is so short that it doesn't really matter. But for me, the reason I don't like the bushy tomato is it is so bushy, it's hard to just get in there and prune. It requires so much space, whereas the indeterminate tomato plant does not require a lot of growing space. So here I have another one, another leaf that's growing on the ground. So I'll just break that off. I'll just go through and break off anything that's resting on the ground, because when you allow the leaves to rest on the ground, it increases the possibility of the plant getting disease. And we don't want that, because then we're going to have to start thinking about how we're going to treat the disease, and we'll be losing some of our produce. So prevention is always better than a cure. And so now you can do two things. You can either leave the section that you broke off in your garden as a mulch, or you can put it in your composting bin. Now I tend to do both, use both methods. Sometimes I just leave the foliage underneath the tomato plant. Other times I just put it in my composting bin. And now, because my tomatoes need an arbor or something to help it to support the weight, I have built this trellis, and then I use strings to tie the tomato and attach it, as you can see here, so it has full support. I do that with both my cucumbers and with my tomato. That way the plant will have full support. Okay, thank you for watching and have yourself a great day. Bye bye.